Dear listener, I welcome you to this program, Personal Problem Solving and Decision Making. My name's Ajime Nyende. I am passionate about sharing with you God's proven principles of making effective decisions when solving personal problems. Our textbook is the Bible. And the reason I use the Bible is one, it has a representative sample of the major decisions you'll ever make. And it also shows you the results or consequences of such decisions. Have a Bible close to you, because in today's program, we will read a short story. In my last video, I introduced to you God's counting system. And I shared with you background information that it has 3 major parts, which we shall review again today, and that it is very, very useful in decision making. Again, that's an issue we are going to look at today, but more so, we are going to focus on the 2 most important words in God's counting system. We always count when making decisions. I said that there are 2 counting systems in this life that we have on earth. There's what we call the world's counting system, which is totally opposed to God's counting system. But these 2 systems have a similarity. Each system has letters, words, and numbers. Now, the key letters in God's counting system are Alpha and Omega. The key numbers are the first and last. Now, today we'll look at the key words, which are the beginning and the end. But I want to emphasize one important point, that we always count when making decisions. You may not be conscious about the counting, but it is there. For example, we count quantifiable things like time, like force, like distance, weight, temperature, light intensity, and even work, and then make decisions based on the counting we have done. We also attempt to quantify and count things like love, patience, kindness, humility, faithfulness, and the like. If we experience that we are getting less of those quantities and yet we need more, we make decisions. If we experience that we are having more of these quantities and we need to keep up that level, again we make decisions. We count friends on Facebook, friends at work, friends at clubs, friends at church, friends in the community. We also count the level of commitment of those friends. And then we make decisions basing on those counts that we have made. Therefore, counting and decision making go hand in hand. Now, as I said, today we are focusing on words. We want to look at how words play a role in counting and more so in decision making. I want to ask you a question. Reflect on your behaviors. What words do you use when making decisions? Well, sometimes you may not be conscious of the word. Sometimes you may, depending on your profession or occupation, on the problems on hand, there are certain words you use. To illustrate this concept, let me give an example. There are certain words you use when you are joking, and there are certain words you use when you are serious. There are certain words you use when you are angry, and there are certain words you use when you are happy. There are certain words you use when you are in trouble, and there are certain words you use when you are relaxing. So now, what words do you use when you are making major decisions? Here are some common words. There's the word yes. There's the word no. There's the word help. Critically think on how you use these three words when making decisions. Now, why am I asking you these questions? The words you use when making decisions are derived from your counting system. If you can start taking toll of the words you use when making decisions, they will give you an idea whether you are using God's counting system or the world's counting system. As an exercise again, there are two words I would like to leave with you. One word is scarce. The other word is abundance. Which of these words belongs to God's counting system? Think about it again. But one of them, either the word scarce or the word abundance, greatly influences your thinking when you are making decisions, particularly those decisions that concern the acquisition and use of resources. Now, having said that, I want to share with you one gentleman whose vocabulary changed because he chose to use God's counting system. That man is Peter. Peter's life changed when Jesus did a miracle in his life. Peter and his colleagues had fished all night and failed to catch one single fish like this. After a night of hard work, in the morning they had nothing to show. In other words, the word scarce was on their lips. And then Jesus gave them a promise that if you throw your net at this time of the day, in this point, you will catch fish. They did so, and they caught so much fish. And from that time, Peter started learning how to use God's counting system. And by the way, God's counting system also has promises embedded in it. And at the end of his life, towards the end of his life, Peter wrote down these words, and I read them. God's divine power has given to us all things that pertain to life and godliness through the knowledge of him who called us by glory and virtue, by which have been given to us exceedingly great and precious promises. Now, those words I have put in red are words that are in God's counting system. God has given to us all things. In other words, in God's counting system, the word scarcity is not there. Well, let's go ahead. We want to look at the key words and phrases in God's counting system. Remember our key text? It is from Revelation 22:13. Jesus says, I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. This is our key text in learning about God's counting system. So, what are the meanings of the two words, the beginning and the end, in God's counting system? Well, I don't have all the answers because I am still learning this counting system. I only share with you what I have already learned, and I encourage you to read the Bible and ask God to teach you. We can approach learning the meanings behind these words in different ways. I want to share with you two ways of getting to know the system. The first way is by reading the scripture and trying to analyze and synthesize the meanings. The other way is by looking at what is happening in nature and then getting models from nature and using those models to understand how God counts his things. I will give an example of each of these two ways. But as I said, these are not the only ways. There are other ways in which we can learn the meanings behind the words God uses. So we begin, and at the beginning I want to inform you that the two phrases, the beginning and the end, are strongly linked to the law of cause and effect. In solving problems, we follow the law of cause and effect because that law is unchanging. That law is the reason why a doctor can look at certain signs and symptoms or certain effects and then get to know the cause, the root cause, and advise or make a decision on how to deal with the problem. So because the law of cause and effect is extremely important in problem solving and decision making, this is the reason why you need to learn and use in your everyday life the words the beginning and the end. So let us look at a few Bible texts that show the importance of these words. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. That verse shows the law of cause and effect. And it also tells us if there is a problem in the heavens and the earth, who do we have to ask for help? It shows us that it is God. Why? He is the one who created the heavens and the earth. When did he do this? In the beginning. The Bible shows us that God counts time. And in Exodus 12:2, he tells the Israelites these words: "This month shall be your beginning of month. It shall be the first month of the year to you." In other words, God has a system of counting years. Now, as I mentioned, the world's counting system also has its own calendar. It has a way of counting time. Although both of them have the unit of a year, yet the months that mark the beginning of the year are completely different. We will look at these discrepancies later on in another video concerning how time can be useful in solving or in making worse our problems, but depending on which counting system we use. Psalms 111 verse 10 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom." Again, this is an example of the law of cause and effect, and it shows the role played by the word beginning. I want to use another model to explain why in the Bible God uses the word "and" between the words beginning and end. In other words, he says beginning and end. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, the first and the last. Why does God use the word "and"? And what is it supposed to tell us? Well, I want to draw an illustration from nature. In nature, we have electricity, and we use electricity to solve very many problems in our lives. You are seeing a schematic diagram of a simple circuit. In that circuit, we have a battery, we have a switch, we have a light bulb, and these elements are connected by wires through a switch. In other words, if an electric circuit is to function, there must be the following. There must be a source of power, which in this case is a battery. There must be conductors of power, and these are the wires. There must be a switch to control power flow, that is to initiate or to stop the flow of power. And lastly, there must be a load. There must be some way in which the power is put to good use. In our circuit here, the load is the bulb. This circuit has rules. If it is to operate normally, the first rule, don't break the circuit. In other words, the terminals of the battery, the positive and the negative, but which in this case I chose to represent with the words the beginning and the end, must always be connected. There must not be a separation between the positive and negative terminals of the battery. In other words, beginning and end are always connected through a switch and a bulb. That is the rule. There is no shorting. Don't short circuit. If you short circuit, in other words, if you bypass the switch and the bulb, you create problems. Use the switch wisely. When it is time to switch on, switch on. When it is time to switch off, switch off. Last but not least, ensure the conductors or the wires can tap and transfer this power safely. These are the basic rules. But how does this electric circuit apply to the subject at hand of God's counting system, where we are looking at the two words, the beginning and the end, and then personal problem solving? I want to let you know that in personal problem solving, we need wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. We need a source of these. We also have work to do. Some of the problems we face are because of our bad behaviors. And so we need to change behavior. But sometimes we do not have the power to change our behavior. We need a source of power. And so this basic circuit that you are looking at shows us schematically how we can tap God's power and use it to make decisions and then effect those decisions. In other words, learning God's counting system gives us access to His power. And in order to tap His power, we need to do so systematically. So now I want to show you a simple circuit for tapping God's power. Again, this is a model. So when you look at this model, we have learned in the previous section that the positive and negative terminals must never be disconnected, but they must be connected through a switch and a load. So we are applying it to now your personal life. In your life, you can have access to God's power, and you can use God's power to solve personal problems. But for you to access God's power, you need wires, you need conductors, you need connection. I will explain the conductors in a later video. I've decided to avoid it now. I want to focus on two things in this circuit: the switch and the load. The switch are the decisions you make. Your decisions switch on God's power, or your decisions switch off God's power. Now, you must have a problem. There are problems which you yourself must handle, and there are problems which God alone must handle in your life. For example, if you have a problem with the food, you want to eat food, God provides it in different ways. He can provide the seed, the rain, the sunshine, and the ground. And then your task is to plant the seed, to water it, and harvest, and then prepare the food. So there are problems to which we should direct God's power, and there are those that we should handle ourselves. So you must have an appropriate load for God to handle. And when you have set yourself up, make sure that the connection, the beginning and the end, are part and parcel throughout the whole process. They are together. God's power is available, as I made it clear. I want to read for you a few texts to confirm this. Psalms 62 verse 11 says, God has spoken once. Twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God. Power belongs to God. Now you need to make a decision. Remember your switch. These are the decisions you make. If you want to switch on, then you need to believe that power belongs to God. If you want to switch off, then have doubts as to whether power belongs to God. Now that is not the only decision you need to make to switch on God's power. There are other decisions. Your behaviors must reflect that you believe that power belongs to God. What are some of the behaviors that reflect your belief? Psalms 59 verse 16 says, "But I will sing of your power. Yes, I will sing aloud of your mercy in the morning, for you have been my defense and refuge in the day of my trouble." One of the behaviors you need to display in order to switch on God's power in your life to solve difficult problems is to sing about His power. But how can you sing about His power when you have not experienced it? Psalms 63:2 gives us an idea of how we can experience God's power. Psalm 63 verse 2 says, "So I have looked for you in the sanctuary to see your power and your glory." Look for God. Look for Him in His sanctuary. And the purpose of your looking for Him is to see His power and His glory. Make it your intention. Make a decision that I want to see God's power and God's glory in my life. Psalms 66 verse 3 gives us another interesting behavior. A behavior which, if you practice, switches on God's power in your life. Psalm 66 verse 3 says, "Say to God, how awesome are your works. Through the greatness of your power, your enemies shall submit themselves to you." Did you hear this verse? It said, say to God. In other words, speak out loudly. Speak to God loudly. Tell Him how awesome are your works. Through the greatness of your power, your enemies shall submit themselves to you. Dear listeners, I strongly encourage you to seek God's power. There is a lady who had a problem and sought God's power. Let us read quickly her story. It is found in Mark chapter 5 from verse 25 to 32. Mark chapter 5 verse 25 says, "Now a certain woman had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from many physicians. She had spent all that she had and was no better, but rather grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'If only I may touch his clothes, I shall be made well.' Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of the affliction. And Jesus, immediately knowing in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, 'Who touched my clothes?' But his disciples said to him, 'You see the multitude thronging you, And you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see who had done this thing. Now, this story may be familiar to you, but its principles are extremely important. God is always on the lookout for people who want to tap his power and use it to do good to themselves and to others. From this lady's story, we can learn many things. I leave it to you to see what you can learn. But one thing I want to point out, God wants you to use this power circuit. Get connected to him and use his power to solve your personal problems. I want to ask you that when you pray, when you kneel down to pray, ask God to teach you his counting system. Because when he teaches you his counting system, you will be able to tap his power and use it for good. Put aside time to diligently study the Bible. There is no shortcut to this. You have to read the manual for tapping God's power. But I tell you, the time you invest will be worth it. For the good things you will reap will be far, far exceedingly abundant. One interesting thing I have found in the Bible, God is always looking out for people to tap his power, to solve their personal problems in novel ways. God is like these power companies that sell to us electricity in our communities. They are always looking for customers. They are always expanding their greed. They are always interested in making money. God is always looking out for people, except the different thing with God, that his power is not for sale. It is free. All you need is to learn. And when you learn, use it. And when you use it, you benefit. That is the thing. We have used electricity to do very many great things in society. I am able to record and save this video and post it on YouTube because of electricity. But then, what will happen if we tap and use God's power? If with electricity we have done so many good things, how about when we deliberately tap God's power? I am asking you to make that crucial decision to learn God's counting system. In my next video, we will be looking at the first two numbers, the first and the last. Interestingly, they use words to describe these numbers, but we are looking at numbers. So do not forget to tune in. I want to thank you so much for viewing. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel so that you get an email in your inbox the moment I post a new video. May God bless you, and I am praying that you learn how to use God's counting system.